Cal Mooney lit his last cigarette with shaking fingers. His knuckles were thick with old scars, hands weathered like dried rope. He stood on the edge of Dock 9, staring out toward the stretch of sea where the horizon split the sky like a knife. His coat flapped in the cold wind, sour with brine and mildew. Behind him, the Widowmaker bobbed in its berth like an old dog with bad hips. She was a junker, 20 years past her prime. Her hull stained reddish-brown, her deck warped and rust-cracked. The net rigging was rigged too tight. The engine coughed even when idle. But she still floated, and that was enough. Cal didn't fish for pride. He fished because he owed every loan shark, from Halifax to Yarmouth. Because the bank took his home. Because cancer took his wife. Because fishing was the only thing left he hadn't lost yet. He wasn't going alone. Reese was already aboard, checking the diesel tanks. A hulking brute of a man, broad-shouldered, bald, and silent, with arms that looked like they belonged to someone who killed for a living. No one knew where he came from. They only knew he worked cheap and didn't flinch at the sight of blood. Cal didn't ask questions. Questions were for people who could afford answers. Then there was Brody, fresh from Ontario, wide-eyed and full of piss. "This her?" he asked as he stepped onto the gangway, squinting at the Widowmaker. "She's rustic." Cal took a drag off his cigarette. "She floats." That's more than I can say for the last two who tried whalers. Brody grinned, eager. "So the stories are true then? The Bay eats boats?" Cal exhaled. Smoke curled around his words. "Only the ones that don't listen." They left port at 3:47 a.m. No one saw them off. As they passed the last lighthouse, its beam flickering like a dying eye, the fog thickened. The water turned glassy. The stars vanished, one by one, behind the creeping grey. Brody leaned on the rail, peering into the nothing. "Feels weird," he muttered. "Like the ocean's holding its breath." Cal steered with steady hands. "Don't talk, just listen." "To what?" "The silence." Because silence in Whalers Bay didn't mean peace. It meant something was watching. The sun tried rising, but failed. Grey light spilled weakly over the sea. Never bright enough to banish the fog. It clung to the boat like spiderwebs. Every shape, every sound, muffled. Distant. Wrong. Cal kept his eyes on the water. Reese worked in silence, tightening winches, checking cable tension. His jaw was clenched, and the scars on his neck twitched whenever the wind picked up. Brody leaned over the railing, already pale from the sway. "Something about this place feels off," he muttered. "Like the world just stops out here." Cal didn't look at him. "That's because it does." Brody was full of questions. He talked when he was nervous. "Didn't two other boats vanish here? In like 2009? Never found the crews?" Reese looked up for the first time, his face blank. "3 boats." Brody frowned. "What?" "3. Catherine May, the Vanta, and Devil's Hand." Brody looked at Cal. "You were on one of them?" "No." Cal's voice was flat, but I pulled up a piece of the Vanta's hull once. Still had skin stuck to the rivets. Brody blinked. Skin. Cal turned and looked him dead in the eye. Inside the steel. Brody stopped talking. By noon, the winch line was ready. The red net hadn't seen water in years. It smelled like rot and salt and something else. Something sweet, like meat left in the sun. Cal inspected it as Reese fed it through the motorized pulley system. "Won't hold if it gets snagged," Reese said. "It won't snag," Cal muttered. Brody raised a brow. "You sound sure." "I'm not," Cal said. "But it doesn't matter. The net goes down." He pressed the button. The winch whirred. Cable unwound. The net slithered into the water and sank. Deeper, deeper, pulled by heavy anchors and something darker. Reese muttered a prayer in another language. Brody watched the net vanish, eyes wide. "How deep does it go?" he asked. "Past the shelf," Cal said. Brody blinked. "You're trawling the trench." Cal nodded. "Something lives there, always has." 20 minutes in, the winch jerked hard, the metal groaning, cable straining. Then came the smell. Copper, brine, and rot. Reese stood perfectly still. Brody took a step back from the railing. The net hadn't come up yet, but the boat had stopped drifting. Something was pulling them. Cal ran to the controls, reversing the motor. The cable didn't move. Then they heard it. A wet, horrible ripping sound. The cable snapped tight again, and water splashed high along the port side. Something bubbled up. Not enough to see, but enough to sense. Something massive. Something waking up. Brody leaned over the side. "What the hell is?" He didn't finish the sentence. A barbed spine shot up from the water and pierced him through the throat with a wet pop. Blood spurted across the cabin wall like red paint. Brody twitched violently. His boots kicked the air for 3 seconds before he was yanked overboard. His scream choking on blood as his body hit the water and vanished in the churn. Reese didn't scream. He didn't even move. He just stared down at the bloody water and said, "The net caught something." Cal's hands were shaking. He whispered, "No, it caught us." The ocean boiled red where Brody went under. The smell of blood rolled across the deck like steam, thick, metallic, almost sweet. Cal couldn't take his eyes off it. The crimson eddies, the bone slivers, a single boot floating in a lazy circle. Reese pulled the throttle back. The engine groaned, but barely responded. Whatever was on the end of the red net, it was bigger than a shark, bigger than a whale, bigger than anything Cal could name. The depth gauge flickered erratically. 500 feet, Reese muttered. "Impossible," Cal said. "The net can't reach that far." Reese looked up, eyes hollow. "Then it's not the net moving." The boat shifted hard, a sudden pull, sharp enough to knock Cal off his feet. The Widowmaker spun slightly in the water. A vibration passed through the deck, a low hum, like the moaning of distant metal. The hull creaked in protest. Bolts groaned in their sockets. The line remained tight, vibrating like a plucked wire. Cal gripped the winch lever. "Reel it in." Reese didn't move. "Now." "I can't," Reese said. "It'll pull the boat apart." "We don't have a choice." They tried. The motor screamed, smoking, cables shrieking as the winch slowly, painfully, began to drag something up from the trench. The water responded with a deep thump, like the heartbeat of a buried giant. The first thing to breach the surface was a torso. It slammed into the deck with a wet, final thud. It was human. Or it had been. Pale, waterlogged, bloated. But its arms were too long. Its ribs, visible through broken flesh. curled outward like splintered crab shells. Its face had no eyes, just holes, wriggling with tiny, translucent worms. The net dragged more out, a collection of limbs, still twitching. One hand gripped a rusted harpoon. Another clawed at the deck, as if resisting death. The last was a head, jawless, but smiling. Not Brody's, not human. Rhys stepped forward. Cal grabbed his shoulder. "Don't. I've seen this before," Rhys said softly. "In Ukraine. In the Black Sea. They brought something up. Same smell. Same eyes. What happened?" Rhys's lips barely moved. They vanished. The net surfaced fully. It was full of bodies. Some whole, some torn, some rotten, some still moving. The net pulsed like a giant lung, stretched tight by its hellish cargo. Some of the corpses wore diving suits from decades past. Others wore nothing but scars and bone necklaces. Cal stared, paralyzed, as one opened its eyes. Pale orbs set deep in a shattered skull. It looked at him. Then it spoke. A bubbling, half-drowned voice. "You came back." The thing inside the net tore through the mesh. A mass of limbs and faces, fused by barnacle and rot. It rose, towering, hunched, slick with seawater and blood. A tower of the dead. Dozens of mouths. A nest of human torsos twisted around a bone-black core. Rhys grabbed a fire axe and swung. He cleaved a head from the mass. It popped like an overripe melon, spraying black ichor across the wheelhouse. The mass screamed, a high, ululating shriek that made Cal's ears bleed. Tentacles shot out. One grabbed Rhys's leg and yanked. He screamed, but not like a man in pain, like a man who had seen this before. Rhys fought with the axe, hacking wildly. Each strike cut through something. Tendon, muscle, metal-hard chitin. The creature flailed and bit. Its many jaws latched onto Rhys's side and ripped. A chunk of flesh tore free. Blood sprayed. Bone gleamed. Still, Rhys didn't stop swinging. Not until the tendrils wrapped around his neck. There was a wet crack, and then his head rolled across the deck like a coconut. Cal screamed. He'd known death. He'd seen men drowned and broken, but nothing like this. Cal ran to the wheelhouse, slammed the door, and locked it. The fog outside had turned red, not from sunset, but from blood mist, sprayed in arcs across the deck. He grabbed the flare gun. One shot. He stared at the controls. The depth gauge had shattered. The compass spun like a carnival ride. The engine light was blinking. But the boat wasn't sinking. No, it was drifting deeper. Cal felt it in his bones. Shapes moved in the mist. Not just the thing from the net. Others. Swimming. Crawling. Climbing up from the waterline. Bare hands. Wet feet. Hollow faces. One slammed into the window. Skin sloughed off on impact. Another began chewing at the metal frame, jaw distending. The door thudded. The creatures were trying to get in. Cal raised the flare gun. "I'm not going quiet." He fired. The flare struck the fuel barrel Rhys had left open. Fire exploded across the deck, licking up netting, tarpaulin, bone, and beast alike. The creature howled, its flesh bubbling, melting, revealing rows of insectile ribs and spiraling teeth. Corpses ignited like dry leaves. One tried to crawl into the flames, shrieking in broken French. Cal kicked open the emergency hatch and climbed onto the cabin roof as the fire spread. The creature screamed again and split in half, birthing smaller, eel-like horrors that slithered into the water. Some still glowed. Some still had human faces. The Widowmaker burned into the next morning. Cal drifted in the lifeboat, delirious, bleeding from a dozen cuts. He watched the flames rise and die. He watched the fog roll back, the sea calm once more. But he could still hear the net unraveling. He could still see the mass of mouths. He laughed, then wept, then laughed again. They found him 2 days later, floating, silent. In his hands, he clutched something, a piece of cable, still red, still wet. When they took him aboard, he looked up at the medic and whispered, "Don't fish deep. Not with red net. It remembers what you feed it." Whalers Bay is still there. Still quiet. Still hungry. Fishermen avoid it now. Even the drunk ones. Even the desperate ones. But sometimes a net washes ashore. Treaded. Stained. Inside, there's always something left behind. A tooth. A nail. A tongue. And if you listen close, closer than you should, you can hear them. You came back.